So, this is a really special episode today. I'm going to be reading from my journal. This is an entry that I've been working on with my therapist, kind of just talking about my life story and some of the things that I've been through and how I've made it to be who I am today. This is only a very rough draft. There's still a lot of things I want to add to this, and this is just part one. So there will be a second video where I talk about the rest of my life after this part leaves off. I talk about for being a young child until I was about 20, 21 in this, and that still leaves about 7 or 8 years where a lot has happened. So if you enjoy this, please like and subscribe so you can be notified when the second part comes out if you want to follow along. And I just really hope that this can reach someone and let them have the words that I needed to understand my situation when I was younger. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start this. Who am I? I am a strong woman and a survivor. I am a musician, an artist, a philosopher, and a healer. All I know is that almost nothing is certain, and almost everything can change. I'm nothing more than a fool, following her heart on the way back home. Life is a journey, and love is the guide. I had a very isolated childhood. I had a few friends, but I really never had a steady group of peers. I did have a really close friend whose name was Scott, and I hung out with him a lot, but my parents were very busy most of the time. So really any free time I had, I would go over to his house if he was available, and if not, then I would just, find my own thing to do to occupy my space. A lot of times I was in like after school programs, or my parents would send me to camp because they were just really busy, didn't have a lot of time. He was really my only friend at the time, and I remember being bullied by a lot of my peers, and this went from early grade school up until I was in high school. And I remember losing interest in school and just taking care of myself at a really early age. I think it was around second grade. I just stopped doing all my schoolwork and I just kind of tuned out, and I would spend a large part of my time playing video games and reading and listening to music and just doing anything where I was isolated in my own space where people couldn't hurt me. I have a kind of a segue here, and this is something that I didn't realize until after, because I had a repressed memory resurface, and I've talked a little bit about that. But it wasn't until recently that I realized that I'd been molested several times when I was a child. Once by a babysitter, and once by a close personal family member. And I was never really able to talk about it. I was never really able to get support, and I really feel like that contributed a lot to me feeling so alone and isolated and just unable to connect to other people throughout my childhood. But it was a little bit disconnected, but I think it's important. I think it fits in. I just think it also deserves a break from the other part of the story. So that being said, I never really felt like I could fit in. And I had just a few friend groups in school and at camp and other places. Like, I would kind of make acquaintances with people, but I never really had friends. And I never really felt like anyone understood me. I was always trying to prove myself to other kids, but I never really felt like I was good enough. And I remember this being really young and having those feelings of just, why aren't people around me? Why don't people want to hang out with me? Am I weird? Am I wrong? And I have ADHD, and I do believe that I'm on the autism spectrum somewhere. And also on top of that, being transgender, I just really was not able to express how I was feeling or the situation that I was going through internally. And so I just kind of got labeled as lazy and weird. And, you know, I had a lot of social situations that kind of reinforced that. I remember being really young and, you know, everyone else would have birthday parties and all these people would show up, and, you know, sometimes I would get invited every once in a while, but, you know, not most of the time. And it was more out of like obligation, because like they invited the whole class kind of thing. But that being said, it's like no one really ever came to my birthday parties, and, you know, I spent a lot of time alone, and it really just, it hurt. And by the time I was a teenager, I was really angry at the world and just very emotional. I felt deprived of love, like people owed me love and were somehow withholding it. And I was just really depressed and suicidal. I was constantly being punished for not being able to do well in school or not being able to take care of my chores. And I was stripped of a lot of my freedoms at school and at home. I remember not having a lot of recesses and, you know, being at the silent lunch table a lot. And then when I got home, my parents would take away my video games and not let me go outside. And it was just this cycle of real just depression and anxiety and just never feeling like I was good enough. But this just getting pressured like that and being unable to express myself, it just really had an emotional toll on me. And this really hit alongside my male puberty, and it kind of just was like a whirlwind of pain and, you know, why am I even here? And I committed my first suicide attempt at the age of 12, which is really young to be that depressed that you want to kill yourself. And I was punished for that as well by my parents, and they took away everything I had, you know, kind of like take your shoestrings so you don't hang yourself, but also take away all your will to live. And I had a long time after this in what my dad would see as like a male power struggle for dominance and an oppositional defiance disorder. That's the way he saw it. And what I knew in my heart to be just a fight to survive and exist in a world that just didn't understand me or have space for me, and where I was just in pain a lot of the time. Things escalated a lot after that, and through the next few years after I failed at killing myself, I decided to run away from my home. and I was about 13 at that point, and I had a backpack full of stuff, and I brought my dad's laptop because I wanted to sell it for food because I didn't know how I was going to support myself at 13. But I just knew that I couldn't live there anymore. And my parents pressed felony theft charges on me. So I was placed into the criminal justice system. And I ended up on probation from the time I was 13 to the time I was 18. So pretty much my entire childhood, or my entire adolescence, was spent on probation. I started to develop a drug problem after this because being in the criminal justice system puts you around criminals, and criminals do a lot of drugs, and it was really easy for me to get a lot of drugs at a very early age. And by the time I was 15, I was smoking weed daily. I was doing anything I could to get high, whether it was huffing like, Axe from a spray can to eating triple C's and cough medicine, stealing a bunch of cough medicine and getting high that way, to raiding my parents' pill cabinet for anything that even relatively caused drowsiness on the bottle, and just taking as much as I could. It just, anything I can get my hands on, I was just putting in my body at that point. And around the end of that period, when it really started to get bad, was when I started smoking spice. And I made a lot of really unhealthy choices at this time. I stole my dad's car and I crashed it. I fled the scene and I got a hit and run charge. I was emotionally abusive to my friends and my family, and just everyone around me, my partners. I just didn't understand what being okay was, and I just lashed out a lot during that time. I molested my friend Colin. We were really drunk, and I just kept on begging him to have sex with me until he finally consented. And it wasn't consent, but he finally agreed, and we'd had really horrible and mutually upsetting sex. Definitely more so for him, but it was just not a good experience. I'll say that very loudly and clearly. But I even sexually assaulted several animals during this period, which is really hard for me to talk about. But I had been raped several times, and I'm not saying it's an excuse, but I just really was in a dark place, and I just was looking for anything to make me feel alright. It really drove me into the deepest depression I have ever felt. I tried to cover everything up with drugs, but I just couldn't get high enough. And, to this day, I consider spice one of the hardest drugs I've ever done, and I've done meth. It was one of those things that it was marketed as being similar to weed, and everyone thought it was very harmless, but it actually was one of the most physically and mentally addicting substances I have ever put in my body. It really started me to snowball down the path of addiction to where, I couldn't stop. It wasn't that I just wanted to get high. It wasn't that I just wanted to be numb. It was like, I now I can't stop. Now I'm physically addicted to this substance, and stopping is painful. And that was a really hard point for me. and a lot of people that I was interacting with, I'm sure. The high was very short-lived, and the physical and mental withdrawals were intense, as I mentioned. It got so bad that I even had sex with one of my friend's moms so I could steal her keys, so I could steal her car to have my friend drive us, because I wasn't confident in driving at the time, to the store to buy drugs with her stolen credit card. And I was like 14 at this point. And I cannot begin to express to you how quickly it takes hold and it just grabs you. And you just, at that point, once you are physically addicted, it is so much harder to let go of it. This cycle continued for a long time with me using harder and harder drugs until I was around 18 years old. By this point, I had done pretty much anything under the book that I could name. The only things that I didn't really do were heroin, PCP, and crack. And I never injected myself with any substances, but I had done meth, I have done ecstasy, I've done ketamine, I've done DMT, I've done acid, I've done mushrooms, I've done, a bunch of really sketchy and weird research chemicals that you probably haven't even heard of, and if you did, you're probably better off if you hadn't. I really cannot stress how I just would put anything into my body as long as it took away the pain for even a second. But my parents would frequently raid my house or my room, and they would just search everything I had, and whether it was drug related or not, they would find it. And I felt like I had no privacy, and I was living in a constant state of paranoia and just anxiety, and never knowing if what I had was just going to disappear. And it really contributed in a large way to my fear of lack of object permanence that I have these days. But I was even robbed by several of my friends at this period. I had been tased multiple times. I've just been burglarized, where people walked in and just stole everything, drug related or not. To this day, someone stole my drum set, and I've never gotten it back. And they tried to steal my guitar, a bunch of personal belongings, and it was really hard to live that life of, I never know who's going to turn on me. There's a reason they call it a trap, and it's really hard to get out once you get in it. But I ended up actually living out of a trap house not too long after that. And this is another really low point for me. For several months, I was just selling large quantities of ecstasy and living out of this house and going to events with these people to sell drugs. And that was my source of income. That was how I took care of myself. And I still had a room at my parents' house, but I just felt so unsafe there that it wasn't, I didn't feel any less unsafe at this drug house where people literally had guns and drugs, and someone got kidnapped. That was a real thing. Someone legitimately got kidnapped at a party I was at, and she showed up a couple days later, but none of us know what happened. And it's just, she got kidnapped by someone who went to the party too. Someone who was invited to this party kidnapped a guest and held them hostage. And I still didn't feel any more safe at my house. I spent most of my time there getting ludicrously high, and you know, just doing whatever I could to keep feeding that addiction. This all led to a period where I was doing near an overdose amount of drugs, like 3 or 4 times a week. I was doing like an 8-ball of ecstasy, which turned out it was meth, like every other day. And it's almost really hard for me to talk about because it's just, I cannot express how grateful I am to just have survived that experience and to just remember how I used to feel back then and how much stress and anxiety I was under. It's just night and day difference. But I can't remember the majority of the time I spent living there, and it got to the point where even some of the other people who were living there really started to notice how bad my mental and physical health was getting. At a certain point, they even asked me to leave because they no longer felt like they were, safe with me knowing about their activities. Like, they thought I was going to get them arrested, or like, not like I was going to call the cops, but I was going to do something or slip up and everyone was going to get busted because of me. And I decided to leave after, they basically forced me out. But on my way out, I actually stole a bunch of drugs from these people, knowing that they had guns and really could have hurt me. And I just cannot explain how reckless I was during that period, and that was just one of the many reckless things that I did. I couldn't go to events after that because I just didn't feel safe. Like, I felt like someone was actually going to come after me. And, it's just, it is incredible what you will do in the middle of an addiction. I just, if anyone's out there is struggling with addiction right now, I guarantee you are not alone, and nothing you do right now is beyond where you can come back from if you choose to make that decision. As long as you're alive, you have the choice to change. But I was able to pay them back eventually, but being unable to go to any events, I really had to stop selling ecstasy, and it forced me to, pretty much, try and find other ways to make money. I got kicked out of my parents' house shortly after this, and I ended up moving with my friend Noah. At this point, my only sources of income were selling drugs and whatever money I could get my parents to give me. I didn't have a car, and so I mainly, was selling weed and acid at this point. I had quit ecstasy just because of my inability to get it, as much as I saw that it was actually killing me. I think, part of me couldn't ignore how horrible it made me feel. Not during, but after. And I really started to look more at myself during this period after I'd gotten off the ecstasy. And I realized in some way that, like, I do have to have some limits on the things that I'm doing, otherwise I'm actually gonna die, which part of me wanted, but consciously I was still, doing my best to ignore the pain that I was feeling. So I had a couple of really traumatic experiences during this period, especially involving drugs. There was specifically a period, this is one of the most unpleasant experiences I've ever had, but I unintentionally did 35 hits of acid. I was given bad information about the potency and the actual composition of the substance I was given. And I thought I was doing 10 hits of LSD, but I ended up doing 35 hits of an unknown substance. And it literally took me about 4 days to come down entirely from that drug. I was laying in a fire hill for a substantial amount of time, and I didn't even recognize that I was being bitten because I was just literally feeling like my skin was melting off of my flesh. And it was like 24 hours of like just pure agony and misery and being extremely uncomfortable. What I had done was some sort of synthetic chemical that was supposed to simulate acid but was not actually LSD, and most of them are much less stable, much more neurotoxic. And if it was the chemical or even anything in the family of chemicals that I think it was, then I did probably about 5 times what the lethal dosage was, or the LD50, where 50% of people die at that dosage because everyone has different levels of tolerance to different substances. But all I can say is it was an experience that left my brain permanently changed, and I still have the effects of that substance. I still feel the effects of that substance a decade later. I really feel like I did actual damage to my brain during that experience, and it has changed the way I read and write and process information in a substantial way. And if you're going to be doing drugs right now, just make sure you're being aware of the things that you're putting in your body and doing everything you can to be safe, because there are some things out there that can really just hurt you in ways that you didn't intend. But this event really caused me to slow down and look at my drug use a little bit more. This whole process really started giving me the space that I needed to start my journey towards healing and growth, because I couldn't just block out what I was feeling with drugs anymore, because I just couldn't get high enough. Like, nothing could quite get me as high as that trip, and it's like I had more of a mental tolerance to other things, and it never felt like it was enough after that. And so I started looking for the answers in other places. Ironically enough, I really look at this as one of the most positive experiences in my life. Even though it was extremely painful, it really helped me start to change my life for the better and get to the place where I am today. So I'm really grateful for that. But I came really close to losing my life that day, and that just really changed the way that I looked at things. Not too long after this, I was kicked out of my friend Noah's house, partly because of that experience, and I almost ended up actually homeless, like nowhere to sleep. And thankfully my parents let me come back to stay with them just for long enough to get a job, and what I'm really grateful for is they gave me a car, which was enough for me to start working and to start to get the foundation that I needed to actually take care of myself in a different way. I got kicked out again several months later for smoking weed, but I was able to put myself into a motel, and I lived out of my car for about a week, but after a week I was able to put myself in a motel, and I was able to start slowly from there to start to save up, and I started saving for an apartment. I was selling weed. I had stopped selling acid at this point, kind of slowly progressed away from the drug dealing, but I was starting to do more legitimate work, and I had started working for a taxi service where I was taking people home from bars after drinking too much. Me and another person would drive them and their car home, and then they would hop in my car and we'd go to the next fair. But after I got into that apartment, actually right before I got into the apartment, I started experimenting with cross-dressing, especially at like the motel a little bit, and a little bit before then at my parents' house. But it was the first place that I really started to feel a little bit safe, like I had my own space, like I could breathe a little bit, like I had a little bit of money together and, you know, could do the things that I needed to do to take care of myself. But I was really still ashamed of my cross-dressing at this point, and I just felt a lot of guilt and like, why can't I just be normal kind of feelings. But this living situation didn't last long either, and my roommates didn't think I was a good fit due to some things that were completely outside of my control, and a couple of things like remembering to lock the door that, you know, I could have done better on, but had not been in the habit of doing. And they tried to kick me out after I had paid for a month and been living there for like a week or two. And I didn't have anywhere to go or enough money to saved up for anywhere else to live, and I would have been homeless again. So I told them I didn't want to leave, and they ended up trying to get me unlawfully evicted by the police. The police eventually showed up, and they were originally on my side, saying that you can't evict, you know, this person. At this time I hadn't transitioned, but you can't evict this person. You know, they are a resident here. You have to file the eviction process. It takes like 30 days. But they saw some of my paraphernalia laying around, and I had already gotten all of my weed stuff out that I'd been selling, but I forgot a couple of accessories, and he found a silicone puck, which at one point several years prior had some THC wax in it, and, you know, I had gotten all of it out of there very thoroughly, but they decided that was enough to charge me with a felony, and I ended up getting incarcerated for about 3 months. I lost my house, my apartment. I lost my car because it got impounded. It might not have gotten impounded, but I wasn't able to use it for a very long time. I think my parents might have taken it back. I can't remember exactly why, because it's a very stressful period in my life, but I just remember that I was not able to use my car once I got out of jail, and I also lost my job at the time. But while I was in jail, I had no idea how long I was going to be there, and I tried to call my attorney every single day, but I was only able to talk to him twice during the 3 months that I was incarcerated. I started a Dungeons and Dragons game just to try and pass the time, because I didn't know how long I was going to be in there, and I spent a lot of time reading the Bible just because it felt like something to do, and there was actually a really positive community with this pastor who came in to do services voluntarily in the church. He's just a really good dude who did not look down on a single person who was in that jail, and I respect him for that. But at one point I got in an argument with one of the people that I had been doing the Dungeons and Dragons game with. He was my dungeon master, and I shoved him, which ended up getting me thrown into isolation for about a week. But during that time, there was a period where they moved us over to the old jail, and there were about 3 days where I did not have access to drinking water. It was 105-degree heat in the middle of Georgia summer, and the air conditioning wasn't working because they hadn't used this building for about 10 years, and they had only opened it due to extreme overpopulation, overcrowding issues. I genuinely feared for my life for a very substantial portion of my stay in that part of the jail. And to this day, if I had been able to file a lawsuit, I think it would have been very substantial. But I was not able to file a lawsuit because none of the attorneys I could find would take the case because it was going against the state. And I didn't have money to do it up front. But the only thing I had while I was in the jail, in that old jail, was a Bible. And I spent a lot of time reading it. I would say I spent probably the majority of my time in those 72 hours just reading the Bible. Shortly after this, I applied for the workforce. I was trying to get some time off my sentence whenever I did get to court. I didn't know how long I was going to be in there. I was potentially looking at years if the felony stuck. And I just wanted to do everything I could to try and make the situation go as easy as possible. But I was denied for the workforce because my blood test came back and I found out that I was HIV positive while I was being incarcerated. And let me tell you, if being in jail sucks, being in jail and finding out you have a permanent disease is tremendously harder. And people treated me differently when they found out. They treated me kind of like a plague victim, and it just made it that much harder to exist in that space. But the ironic thing is, it actually saved my life. And if I hadn't had discovered that I was HIV positive in that jail at that time, I might not have before my immune system failed me. Because my immune system was so low at that point where even a random opportunistic infection could have come along and killed me. Or it was very close to that point. And if I hadn't have gone to jail, I don't know that I would have gotten tested, because that was not something I was doing regularly back then. It still humbles me to this day to see how such a negative experience could do so much to change my life in such a positive way. I cannot express, especially with the amount of the Bible I was reading and just how spiritual I was getting at the time, how much that changed my view on reality, and how it let me start looking at every single experience as where is the positive, and even if I can't see it yet, I know it's going to show up, because there's always a reason. And I was eventually released from jail, and all the charges were dropped. They eventually tested the container, and they found no THC in the container, because I'd been very, very thorough. I was a stoner, and it had been sitting there for years. So I was released, and all my charges were dropped. I never was able to file a case against the city, but that was the end of my jail experience. It's very anticlimactic. They just came in after 3 months of being incarcerated, and they're like, "Hey, you're free to go." I'm like, "Okay, I'm leaving. I'm not going to ask why." And so I did. And when I was released from jail, my parents let me come back to live with them. I got another job, I got another car, and I was able to get a few $1,000s together. I was cross-dressing more and more, but it was all still in secret at this point. I think a lot of it had to do with realizing how short my life was and facing some of the serious consequences of my actions and my own mortality with the HIV thing, that I just kind of realized that this was something that made me happy, and why am I so miserable over something that makes me happy? And it was really around this time that I decided to talk to someone about how I've been feeling. And that is where I'm going to end this part of the chapter. I am really glad I get to share this. I'm glad I get to do this in a space where other people can see this and interact with it. I want y'all to know that you are not alone, that there are so many people out there who are struggling and they're going through journeys that are really like yours. And it can be really scary. I know it can be scary. But we can do this together. And thank you for doing the work to heal. Because every small little thing you do makes this world a better place. So with that was my life story, part 1. I am so excited to do the rest of this with y'all. So I will see y'all next time. And until then, much love always.